Welcome to Mishna study, Masechet Sheviit, Perek Bet Mishna Gimal. And this Mishnah is really very much a continuation of the last Mishnah, where we're talking about what's allowed to do in your field or to trees on the Shemitah or pre-Shemitah year, right? So when we spoke about the plowing in the first Perek, then we started to speak about different things that you're allowed to do to the tree in the last Mishnah. Over here, we're going to continue. Mesakelim ad Rosh Hashana. The sakel, right, literally means to remove stones, right? Like sekila. With sekila, you stone someone. Over here, you're misakel, so you remove stones from the field all the way up until Rosh Hashana, right? Because you're doing so for the 6 years, grain or trees, whatever it may be. Mekarsemim mezaredin umfaselim ad Rosh Hashana. So you're allowed to do these three things. What are these three verbs over here? So mekarsemim, Harabam explains that you're actually cutting the wheat with your hands from the stalks. You're leaving the chaff, you're leaving the straw over there, similar to we have mekarsemim with the kaf that we saw earlier. We saw this in Masechet Pe'ah or from the pasuk in Tehillim, mekarsemena hazir, right? So over here, we see it literally means that you're taking the grain, cutting it off with your hand, taking that grain off of the stalk. Other mefarshim explain this a little differently. Mezaredin, right? Mezaredim is pruning, right? So you're literally cutting off some of the branches so they grow better, because they grow better, right? So the other branches now will grow and spread better. Umfaselim. Mefasel literally means to cut off the psolet, right? The non-good, right? The lousy branches. So you're cutting those off. The ones that have dried out and aren't good anymore, you're cutting those off. So you got to do these three things all the way up until Rosh Hashana. And Rabbi Yoshua comes and says, "Keziruda uchpisula shel hamishit, kach shel shishit." So how does Rambam explain this? And explains this uniquely. The same when you're allowed to go ahead and prune and cut off the psolet, right, of the bad branches off the trees in the 5th year, the same way when you're allowed to do that up until during the 5th year, as long as it's still benefiting the tree, right, when people would usually do so in the 5th year, so too you're allowed to do that in the 6th year as well, right? But only up until that normal time. Right, the normal time you do it in the 5th year, so you're allowed to do it up to that normal time in the 6th year, and it's not considered preparing for the next years for the Shemitah year. Rabbi Shimon says, anytime I'm allowed to work the avodat ha'ilan, the plowing around the tree, so too am I allowed to go ahead and prune it and cut off the bad branches. Right, so that's up until, as we said earlier, up until Atzeret, up until Shavuot, like we mentioned in the first Mishnah of the last Perek. So too, the same way when you allow plow, that's the same time frame when you're allowed to go ahead and prune. Halacha is like Tanakama, like we said, that you're allowed to do so all the way up until Rosh Hashana, all these things all the way up until Rosh Hashana. I would just point out that Rabbi Yoshua's opinion over here, I explained Harambam the way he explains it. Other Mefarshim explain that Rabbi Yoshua is being Mekel. Right, based on the Yerushalmi, a lot of other Mefarshim explain so that Rabbi Yoshua is saying that you're allowed to go ahead and the same way you're allowed to prune 5th year trees in the 6th year, so too you're allowed to prune 6th year trees in the 7th year. Right, so he's really being Mekel. Rambam doesn't explain like that, and other Mefarshim explain why Rambam doesn't explain like that, but he does how he explains. And halacha, like we said, is like Tanakama, that you're allowed to go all the way up until Rosh Hashana.